it's Foggy again. I want to talk to you a little bit about painting in Manga City of Fire. I'm going to start with my favorite brush, which is the Paint and Apply brush. And as you can see, mine is pretty well set up to my liking, but I'm going to show you how to set yours up. First, obviously you want to select the tool, and then you're going to press the wrench icon, and that's going to bring up the subtool detail dialog box, which is fabulous, and it would do you a world of good to familiarize yourself with some of the options here. It's going to start with brush size, obviously, which am not even going to bother talking to you about. As you can see, the opacity, there's no eyeball in this rectangle here. And what that eyeball does is it brings it up here on your tool property box. Now, the opacity you really don't need, because the opacity on these types of brushes is covered by the amount of paint, the density of paint, the color stretch, and here hardness and brush density. So what those things basically mean is that this is a self-blending brush. Think of this as an airbrush that will blend itself down, okay? So I would go ahead and select the options that I have here if you want to use them. Now, this mix rate of sub-drawing color, this is a really useful option when you have multiple layers that you've already painted. So for now, I'm going to leave that off. But when I have like 10 layers that I'm painting on, this is something that comes in handy to not have 10 layers that you're painting on. And I'll show you why a little bit later. I would keep your mixed ground color on running color because that kind of keeps the edges more feathered, soft. Blend is going to really just kind of smoosh the two colors together, whereas running color will blend the edges but leave a strong defined area of the new color that you're painting with. The amount of paint, I usually leave it at 100. You can play with that slider as you see fit, and you can make it work with your stylus and your tablet. The density of paint, what this is going to do is you're going to lay down the color. It's going to affect how much of the color is being laid down with each stroke that you put down, obviously. It's going to affect the blending of the paint as well. And what I mean by that is as you can see, I have a pretty soft color running here. It's not just going to affect how much color goes down, it's going to affect how it blends out. So I hope that kind of makes sense there. The color stretch is going to affect how much that color will blend out into the background area. So that's a decent option to familiarize yourself with. Now, the intensity of blur is something I like to leave on automatic because it scales with the brush size. And if you mess with that too much and you forget that you've messed with it, you can really frustrate yourself so much because everything's going to start looking funny after a while. I like to leave it on automatic, to each their own. The next thing that I would say that you would even want to mess with could be your correction. You can turn your stabilization up and down. Brush stroke, what that does is it hooks the end of the brush stroke. So I'll show you what that means. When you turn that up, you see how that hooked at the end? Probably not. Let's try a brighter color here. See how that hooked back at the end? That's what brush stroke does. To me, it's a very annoying option. I don't use it at all. I usually use it at 2. Able to snap means that it can snap to a vector map. I leave that on just in case I'm, not fully confident with my own sketch and I'm still vector lining a little bit. But that's something that you may or may not even need. Starting and ending, this is just kind of how the brush starts and ends. This is something, once again, that I don't really mess too much with. If you head back up to ink, you can turn your opacity slider on. Now, I did say that I usually don't. There are, of course, circumstances where it is appropriate. Like if you're working with somebody that has a gradiated hair or, or like an ombre or whatever you want to call it. or something like that, where you really kind of have to be careful with how much color you're using, that's where you would use that. Brush tip, of course, it's gonna change the shape of the brush itself, and I have no need to mess with that right now. You can obviously change your brush shape if you have your pre-registered brush shapes, or if you have your own custom brush shapes, textures, and the stroke is basically, is it going to gap? How much is it going to gap? Things like that. So I've pretty much got mine set up where I have brush size, the ground color mix, amount, density, color stretch, intensity of the blur, just in case I need to mess with that. Hardness and brush density I use to kind of serve as the opacity for this tool. The hardness affects, obviously how hard the edge of the brush is, and the brush density, kind of think of it if you had a really thin paintbrush versus a really fat paintbrush. And stabilization, obviously, we all love that option. All right, so I'm going to kind of show you a little bit how I use the tool. The bigger it is, the messier it is. So what I like to do is I like to use on multiply the basic tone, the basic skin tone, or the basic flat tone, whatever. Just kind of make big, broad brush strokes. And this is something that you can also do if you're having issues. You can also do this with your airbrush. I like to turn my hardness up, and then you can use this brush to blend it down. So that's just one way that you can do this. And then what I do after that is I'll go in with a much, much smaller brush, much darker color, and kind of get into my details. And now the way that the paint and apply brush works is the harder you press, the more color it lays down. And then as you're not applying as much pressure, you blend that color out. And then I like to use it with a soft eraser because it is kind of a messy tool. And it's something that takes a little bit of practice to get used to. Now, Wacom makes these brush nibs that have a spring in the middle of them. I love that nib with this brush. In fact, that's what I'm using now. But of course, not everybody has those, or not everybody can find them. So, it's completely possible to use the brush without the brush nib in your pen. So don't think that that's some sort of requirement that you have to have. It's the beauty of Manga Studio is that everything is custom. It just takes practice. Now, this is what, from what I understand, this is where the area of frustration is, where you have this sort of and I accidentally fixed it, where you have this sort of uneven two lines and they're not blending right. Okay, so this is what you can do to fix this situation. I'm obviously using sort of a, pasta vomit kind of orange color. What I would do is I would pick up that skin tone, that basic tone, and I would gently, about medium pressure, fill that back in. Because that's just going to kind of force it down into that second hard area. And then say you really like this color, the way that I love that I'm shading boobs. If you really like the color the way that you have it right here and you don't want to mess it up, add another layer. Set it the same way that you have your layer. Go back into your little subtool dialog here. Go to ink, mixing rate of sub drawing color. Turn that on. Don't turn it up and then just exit it. Turn that on and then gently kind of work your slider. Well, I already know how I would set mine is at about 50. And then as you can see, it's pulling that secondary layer up into the new layer. So it's pulling the original color into the new layer, but if you mess that up, you can turn that layer off, you can delete that layer, do whatever you need to do, and you still have that original layer that you really liked. And that's pretty much how you use this brush. Other than that, it's a lot of practice and a lot of patience. So good luck, and I hope I was able to help you out.